this trend and then come up with our own plan and strategies to make sure that we give the best possible experience to the consumers, to the users, so that they see the true meaning or true value in the digital experience that they're having. As part of that, when we looked at, I see that virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality, you can combine them together, call it extended reality. But then the point here is that there is always a push to try out something which looks a little unreal, which you cannot relate straight away, but then you want to live that life. And that's where virtual reality has been awesome. I mean, it allows you to experience altogether different things which were not at all possible a few years ago. Of course, I mean, this term may not be extremely new. I mean, people might have tried this few decades ago, but then with the advancements of the devices in last 5 years, 5 to 10 years, now the devices that we have, it allows us to have true experience of virtual reality. Uh, of course, this disconnects you from the physicality, and what it means is that it does, shake your basic premise, where as a person you want to stay physically connected. Your body is used to be physically connected. Now, all of a sudden, you are getting an experience where it takes you totally away from physicality, and that does cause certain challenges, physical challenges in the people, and it hinders the experience. And of course, I mean, these are the aspects which will require the device manufacturer as well as the experienced designers to kind of take care of the physical well-being of the users, because while the users are immersed into the experience, but then there are after effects. And as a designer, our goal is not just to give the experience in the current moment, but then we are responsible for anticipation part, which means that before the experience starts, we should be able to influence the user. During the experience, anyways we are doing it, and post experience also we need to be responsible and drive the experience accordingly. Similarly, augmented reality is another fantastic area which is solving some real hard problems which otherwise was making things quite inefficient. And what it does is that instead of keeping things extremely virtual, it tries to be as close as possible to the real entities, and then it augments that with the digital experience, so that you can explain that physical entity, physical devices more explicitly. And there, that's where there are tons of experiences which is helping us to solve some hardcore problems. For example, let's say uh, fields like e-commerce or retails. Now there are certain aspects where you want to try out things. You cannot touch it, but then at least you want to feel it. You want to be assured that whatever you are going to buy is really a fit for you. And in such cases, the augmented reality allows you to even see how you will look when you fit this outfit on yourself. For example, let's say you go and try to buy a furniture from, say, for example, IKEA. Now it allows you to kind of select stuff, put it together, and see how it will look like in your house, right? Now all these things have become possible because of this augmented reality. Otherwise, it was left to the imagination of the individuals. And then again, the mixed reality is something where you're trying to bring the unreal part and the real part a little more closer, and that's where you're trying to bring in the physicality and the virtual aspects with more approachable to human being. HoloLens is a great example, and the way they are planning, I mean, I think Microsoft will create few more fans there, where it will improve the mobility. It will allow people to kind of put things in a real physical space, and then keep moving around, keep doing their regular stuff, and then still enjoy the digital experience, take care of digital aspects of their job. Now, all these things will require us as a designer to see how do we allow people to kind of enjoy themselves and still enable them to take care of their jobs seamlessly. You know? While we talk about this XR part, but then the other key aspects that I foresee taking a lot of space is the voice user interface, and specifically in a current pandemic kind of situation where you want to avoid touches, I'm sure voice will make a huge inroad. You already have solutions like Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, and Cortana, which talks more or less your language. I mean, you can talk English, different types of English. You can mix your English with Hindi and your native languages, and then more or less it answers most of the things, And I mean, initially when I got introduced to say Alexa, I mean, to me it looked like it may not be so useful, but then after a couple of introductions, I mean, nowadays like it's a very seamless experience. You want to listen song through Alexa, not through your regular apps. I mean, you just order Alexa and it sings, it gets the right song for you. I mean, now these experiences, I'm saying it's not just going to be limited to playing a song or giving me the weather information, but people will be creating voice content, and those voice content has to be made searchable. So the search engine optimization will take place on the voices, and that's where your experience will help you to enable people to create right type of content and then make use of those contents most effectively. The other aspects that you see on the right side, especially in the center, basically the cross-platform access. While this is nothing new, I mean, as a company, we have been doing this for about 10 years now. But earlier, when we used to say cross-platform access, people were still kind of fine. I mean, okay, give me the experience on the desktop. But now they are very sure that they want very seamless experience. Okay, they may be calling it, say adaptive experience. They may be calling it progressive web app. They may be calling it responsive web app. But then eventually what they are asking for is that, hey, I use different devices at different time of the day, and I want to achieve my common goal of maybe looking at my email, maybe looking at my application, maybe reviewing certain requests, maybe approving certain requests. Give me that capability. And while you are giving me that capability to me, keep it consistent. And it's so seamless, like that. For example, if I'm wearing a watch and if I'm getting a call and my phone is a little away from me, I don't want to kind of get up and pick up my phone. Actually, I want to continue talking on my watch. Now, these kind of experiences are desired, and that puts different kind of challenges on us. That how do you design for an excellent experience when the real estate is varying so significantly? The other significant aspect that I foresee is the conversational aspect, where people want to have a very seamless conversation, whether they want to type, they want to speak, they want to put some gesture in place, and they want sorry about that. So they want to kind of make sure that they are having that seamless experience across the different channels, voice, text, videos, so that they are able to talk to the applications and seamlessly work with the backend with different systems in place and do the job. And some of the examples that we have solved in the recent past is, for example, a guy walking through the warehouse and then having their device tied up on the arm and then updating the warehouse, updating the inventory without touching anything there. Now these kind of experiences people are expecting, and we have to design for that. Then there are other experiences, like for example personal user interfaces, increased consumption of 3D or micro interactions. These are the examples of even further customized needs. For example, if you look at Netflix, they give you a very personalized interface based on your past utilization or past usage, or say your past behaviors. For different users, they give different interface. Now, since people have so much data and the UIs can be rendered dynamically, as a as a designer, I mean, as an experienced designer, we should be able to take liberty of that and put certain design, which will create awesome experience for the end users. On the right side, if you look at, these are the hardcore, concerns and recommendations which are coming from the end users now. For example, accessibility. Of course, I mean, there are rules that you have to follow in terms of accessibility, and you have to fulfill that even to get your software released. But then those rules many times, are not as exhaustive in terms of mandatory rules, but many things are made to be kind of optional level 2, level 3 kind of rules. As a UX designer, what you have the privilege is that you should be influencing the product owners to kind of follow the accessibility guidelines in true sense, rather than just for the sake of meeting the guidelines and getting the product out of the door. And that's where you can simplify things for the product owners and enable them to fulfill the accessibility criteria or accessibility guidelines in true sense. Material design is another area. What I see is that so far, as a designer, we were kind of excited about material design. We were recommending people that, hey, use material design, this is good. What I see as a trend for last few quarters is that customers are coming and saying, hey, I need MD. Sometimes I get confused what MD is. Then I say, okay, MD means material design for these guys, okay? Now, customers are able to come forward and say, and those customers who may not look technically geek to you, but then they have started demanding, they have the, good sense of, what kind of design they want. And specifically around, say, the globalization in place, internationalization and localization is one area where it cannot be done after the release of the software. It has to be designed from the beginning. It has to be designed not just for the labels, but it has to be designed for users, dates, names, even the data for that matter, if possible. Then all these aspects have to be taken care from the beginning. And once, of course, the internationalization is in place, you need to take care of the localization aspects also, if you are having a local which changes within the given geography, which is the case, in fact. I mean, if you look at a country like India, I mean, you have every state more or less talking different language, and they want things to be done in their languages, and they are very proud of their languages. In fact. So there will be a localization need there as well. Also, what I have seen as a trend is that offline access, and specifically in B2B area, what I have seen that people have started demanding offline access for most of their needs. And what it means is that they do not want disturbance in their service offering. When they are talking to customer, they do not want customer to say, hey, can I access your Wi-Fi? I mean, people don't like it. People expect you to have mobile connections with a reasonable internet. The thing here is that practically we do not get good internet everywhere, and that's where offline access is really desired. Now, there are say experience aspects that you have to take care there. For example, say when there is a low internet connection, or say the bandwidth is low, you need to give an indication. When you are not able to make use of internet, you need to give an indication that, hey, I'm operating in an offline manner. However, whenever you will get into a reasonable internet connection zone, you will sync it up. So the idea here is that allow me to use the application, but then give me an indication in what mode I'm using it, and then don't interfere with my experience. Now, these are the challenges we will be solving. And while as a designer, I do not know, whether you understand or not, but then security is one aspect where we cannot say that, it's a backend thing. Okay, it is embedded everywhere. And as a designer, we cannot ignore this fact either. So whether it's a two-factor authentication, biometric authentication, single sign-on, or whatever. Basically, like the idea here is that you need to design security from the user experience aspect also. Specifically, look at applications like banking applications, or say most of the applications where you have any kind of transaction happening. More than how it looks and feel, what people want is what kind of security are you giving to me? Is my money safe or not? And for that, who will put the design? Who will give that confidence to the user? It's us, the designers. So what I see is that there are quite a few areas where as a UX designer, we have to provide a compelling solutions. And as part of today's discussion, Rajshekhar will take a deep dive into virtual reality. And of course, this will be a sequence of webinar where we will be kind of either taking one or two pieces together and then coming up with webinar, or we will combine two more pieces and then come up with the webinar. But then idea is for sure to give you a good glimpse into how to design for different kind of emerging trends. So that's what I wanted to discuss to get this webinar started. I think we have a poll where I would like to hear from you. What do you think? Which emerging trend do you think is going to create the most impact in near future? Raj?
Yes. The poll is on your screen, guys. It's a multi-choice, so you can pick the order.
Yeah, so there are multiple choices here, so you can choose as many as you think, and if you do not think that something will be creating a huge impact, then don't select that.
So as Alok was mentioning, the emerging trends or the new arenas is going to be a series of webinars that we are planning, and each session will have one specific area of the trends that we have displayed on the screen, most of them. So you'll be hearing continuous, reminders for the different webinars in the upcoming days. 35 or 40, 81%. Is somebody still voting? For 10 seconds. Yeah, I'm going to close the poll now. Oh, results are very interesting. Can you guys see the screen? So it's virtual reality. I mean, 78% they think virtual reality is the next emerging thing. And next is VUIs, voice user interface, could be the next one. And there is a tie between augmented reality and conversational applications, platform access, and internationalization and localization. Not bad. Okay. Are you all set for digging down into the virtual reality and how we are supposed to design the UX for virtual reality? Okay. So can you guys, if you see the screen, this is a mock-up for a website. So from a human perspective, what is a website for us? If anybody wants to answer, can they raise their hand? What is a website? Anyone? Okay, Keshavan. Yeah, you can unmute. Keshavan, can you hear us? I mean, you can unmute. Yeah, please go ahead, Keshav. We can't hear you, Keshav.
Sorry, again I went into mute.
Okay.
So website is more into talking about what is our vision, mission, basically about the information about the particular company and any kind of business that we are holding in. So what are the information and the mission, vision, and how to
Right.
approach us, all the information that we have in our websites. It's about
That's
the
the
strategy
intent
website.
part. That's the
Yes.
intent part, right? From a
Yeah.
human perspective, how would you consume a website from a UX perspective? Any ideas?
From UI, mostly the pictures will speaks a lot. If
Right.
I'm talking about from the UX perspective,
Right.
pictures and the typographics will catch the eyes of the users. We have to play around with the pictures and the typographics if you want to grab
Okay.
the attention of the
Let's
users.
listen to another perspective. Madhu, yeah, you can speak now. You have to unmute yourself, Madhu, and then speak.
Okay, it's can you hear me,
Yes, yes.
Raj?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Yeah, website typically means a collection of web contents or web pages, which
Right.
gives us the
That,
content of the page and what it going to depict actually, the
correct. I
information.
mean, that's from the intent part again.
Okay.
So, from a user conceiving a website, how can we conceive a website? Uh, okay, let's not waste too much of time. When you're conceiving a website that you're looking at, basically the user will see the website in 2-dimensional, right? It's about the
Yes.
width and height. I mean, the information could be spread across horizontally or vertically, right? It's 2-dimensional because you're using a flat screen wherein the items have been arranged or placed so that you can consume the information. Correct? Now,
Yes.
what if we are going to give a third dimension to it? Like this. So what do you guys think is the third dimension here? The third dimension is nothing but the virtuality, which makes the user to feel as if the website is wrapped around him, and he can experience it in 360 degrees top to bottom. Okay, so that's the dimension that has been added. So this is nothing but a virtual website, and most of the big companies and big heads in the market, they are already designing their websites from a flat screen to virtual screens or the virtual displays. So it's already happening. So that's the reason why we took this topic today as one of the emerging areas. Let's get even further deep into the what this virtual reality means. Basically, virtual reality, it's also known as virtual environment, shortly called as VR. It's a computer simulation that has been created with in a virtual environment. So that's what is a virtual reality. Okay, there are 3 distinctive characters for a virtual reality. That's interaction, imagination, and immersion. Right? They are called the 3 I's in virtual reality. Right? Interaction. So obviously, in a virtual world, your interactions will improve or increase from what you have on a flat screen, which is already there. And immersion. So obviously, you will be detached from the real world and placed into a virtual world where you are going to interact with the virtual objects. So your immersion into the virtual environment will happen. The third one is imagination. Now this is where most of the guys who are new to UX will get confused or may have a couple of doubts. Why imagination? I mean, if the objects are rightly present in front of me, why would there be any imagination needed? But actually, imagination is also needed because you can see only the things that are there in front of you, and you have a peripheral vision as well as you have unseen areas which will actually need your imagination. And also, when we are going deep into the subject, there are areas where the trainings and the implementations are already happening in the market or in the world where this imagination is needed, and I'll explain you them as well. I mean, simply to put, imagination is also needed in a virtual world. So that's why it's called the three eyes in virtual reality. Okay, and let's see what are the needs, or how we have to think in those virtual reality perspectives. Okay, the actually the simulation, remember the simulation that we were talking about, I mean, from a flat screen to a virtual world, will actually make the UX designers to rethink how the human interactions will happen, and their perspectives as well. Because flat, you have only very specific area. Now that specific area multiplied by, say, 5-10 times, then you have to think all those scenarios and all those interactions as well. So there will be more work for the UX, and it has to be very careful. Now let's say, I mean, what could be the areas? So interactions have to be more specific. I mean, we cannot confine it to just clicks or micro interactions. So the interactions have to be very specific and very broad. Okay, and we have to design this in a 3D world, right? When I said 3D world, you have to also bring in the perspective of depth of an object. It's not just the the XY coordinates. There is a Z coordinate as well, which will come into picture. So we have to think from a 3D world perspective. The color combinations have to be grouped or experimented very well. I mean, it's not again, this is because from a flat screen to a 3D world, the way that the users will perceive or digest the colors will be different, because this is more or less close to the real world. So we need to experiment more on the colors as well. New senses have to be considered. When I'm talking about senses, it could be the vibrations, the touch, the sometimes you might have experienced the 7D or a 4D experience, right? Wherein, I mean, even the smell also will be inculcated in that experience, right? So in virtual reality, they're also doing some R&D on the devices where it can change the taste and smell as well. So it's still, in the R&D stage, but yes, experiments are happening. Okay. Now, I want you to be frank and answer me this question. Okay. Can you guys see the screen on your, the question on your screen, please? It's just a simple yes or no. Do you have a blind spot in your eye? Do you think that you have a blind spot in your eye? Yes or no? Thirty-five people have answered so far, 83%. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll now. And interestingly, 70%, close to 70, 69%, they feel that they have a blind spot in their eye. Whereas 31%, they feel that they don't have any blind spot. Okay. So now again, I mean, can somebody tell me what a blind spot is? You can raise your hand and I'll make you speaker. I don't know who this Lenovo is. Do you want to answer? Anantaram. Okay. Please go ahead and unmute yourself, Anantaram. And yeah.
Something which you can't
What's a
see.
blind spot?
Something which you can't see.
We can't hear you yet, Anantaram.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now yes.
Yeah. It's something which you can't see. Your eye can't see.
I can see, as in like, I mean, can you be more, descriptive about it?
It's a place or spot which you can't see.
That's exactly right. Thanks, Anantaram. So there is a spot or a particular place where we cannot see, and that is for every human being. Okay. Now let's do a small experiment to demonstrate that you have a blind spot. Can you see the plus and a dot on your screen? Try to keep your nose as much as possible to the center of the screen. Okay. Close your left eye with the hand, or I mean, if you can close it on your own, I mean, you can close it. See the plus from your right eye. Okay. Don't focus on the dot. Focus only on the plus, closing your left eye. You have to see with your right eye. Now, move either close to the monitor or away from the monitor slowly. I mean, don't rush. Move slowly. At one particular spot, you can't see the dot on the right side. You can move a little further or a little closer to the monitor, keeping your nose as much as centered to the screen possible. Whoever has experienced the blind spot, can you raise your hands, please? Very good. Almost everyone have experienced it. Yeah, that's the, I mean, and if you observe, the distance would be somewhere close to 10 to 15 inches away from the screens. And again, depending upon the size of the monitor or the size of the screen. Generally, if a 15-inch screen is there, the blind spot will hit you between 10 to 15 inches. And everybody has a blind spot in their eye, in both the eyes, actually. Okay. I'll tell you why I'm discussing with this. I mean, it's a fun activity, but I mean, there is a significance for me to, for you guys to take this poll or do this exercise. In virtual reality, the most important thing is about the vision. Okay. And we have to understand the vision if you have to create something in a virtual reality. And again, I'm not sure how many of you know about the focus, the foci centralis, and the facade. Foci centralis is exactly the retina spot where the optic nerve will touch your eyeball on the retina that actually will capture the image. That's called a foci centralis, right? And facade, that's also called as a focus. And whatever is not there in the focus, anything which you can experience that there is something, but you cannot see the details. Say for example, if you're looking at the monitor, to your right and your left there are some objects which are already placed, right? You can feel that there are objects, but you cannot read, or you cannot tell the details of it. So that's called a facade. So let's focus on the the main comfort zone that you see on the screen. What I mean, this is a consolidation of all the experiments or all the studies that they have. I mean, some studies, white papers, they say that the focus or the comfort zone is in between 100 to 110 degrees to the left, to the right. And some say it is, if you are a right-handed person, it is 70 degrees to your right and 55 degrees to your left, and vice versa. And some say no, it's 77 degrees in both directions. But overall, if you take an average, it comes around 70 degrees to your left and 70 degrees to your right, where you can see the objects very clearly without too much of fatigue to your eyes. That's called the field of view, FOV in short form. Okay, and that's where any human will concentrate more and consume the information that they can see through their eyes into the brain. So that's called a field of vision. Field of vision is nothing but the 70 degrees that you are seeing here. And again, based on the distance from the human, it's called a foreground, middle ground, or a background. Now, if you observe, the blind spot that you experience now is between the no vision area and the foreground. It's from 0.5 meters to 1 meter. The foreground is always 1 meter. 1 to 15 meters is middle ground. Okay. So that's where your blind spot is. So it's always better not to design anything in between the foreground and the no vision area, because number one, it's very close to the human eye. Number two, it will create more stress on the eye. So always not suggestible. Foreground, middle ground, and background. I mean, anything beyond 20 meters from the human, we consider that as a background. In between 15 to 20 meters is a middle ground, and 1 to 15 meters is always a foreground. So that's a general classification again. I mean, again, I'm reiterating, every white paper has their own subjects and focus groups, and based on their studies, they will publish their white papers, which is a different thing. Now, if you go away from the comfort zone, there is something called a peripheral zone, which is on an average, again, it will range from 105 degrees to your left to the 105 degrees to your right. This is where you have the facadic view. The facadic view, where, I mean, just now I explained, remember? There are, when you can feel that there are objects, but you cannot clearly depict what it is. So that means your next focus, you can shift always to the facadic views. And these facadic views can be brought into the focus, one either by the movement of your eyeball or by the movement of your neck. Either ways, you can get into the peripheral zone and make it as a focus or a field of view. So that's called a field of regard, which is in short form FOR, for. Okay. And anything beyond this peripheral and comfort zone is nothing but a curiosity zone. So you know that there could be something. It doesn't have to be that. I mean, you have to be very sure that you know that something is behind you, but there is every chance that feel that there could be something behind you. And again, the studies also say that women have more peripheral zone and less curiosity zone, and that's why if somebody is talking them, they can easily feel that somebody is coming behind them, especially women. They have that special ability than males. Okay. That's about the vision for us to understand, and these are the things that we need to consider even before we go onto the drawing board and say, okay, this is what we have to design, and where are we supposed to keep it? Shall it has to be in the comfort zone, or in the peripheral zone, or in the curiosity zone? And based on the priority or the hierarchy of the objects, that's where you will decide where to place which object. Okay. Next comes the ergonomics. The ergonomics of the human beings is again very important in virtual reality. In fact, it is also, I mean, when I'm talking about these things to consider, this also applies for augmented reality as well, because I mean they're pretty close to each other. That will anyways we'll discuss in the next webinar or the next session. But ergonomics of human body is very important because you have to understand the anatomy of the body and how it performs, so that you can depict what is an error, what is a action, and what is an interaction. First things first, most of us, though we like the straight lines, but our human body always performs in arcs. That's the simple, very simple reason being, our body is attached on the basis of a pivot. I mean, if you take any of your attached limbs or arms, I mean, be it wrist, elbow, shoulder, it's all pivoted to one single point. So from that point, it's always an arc. It's not a straight line. There is no body part in a human that actually can go straight. It's always arcs. So we need to remember that, because this is where the humans are going to interact with the objects in a virtual world. So accessibility should always be in the zone of arc, okay, not beyond it. Okay, and the other one is as I said in the previous screen, the comfort zone, foreground, background, and middle ground. You have to understand the importance of the object and arrange it. So that's why I didn't stress too much on the first point. Now, you might have already faced this situation wherein you are leaning or sitting in a chair and holding your mobile in your hand and texting it. After 10-15 minutes, you feel like your neck is so sore that you want to relax, or you want to, sometimes there are people who actually pop their neck bones as well. I can't do it, but most of them they do. That's how they relax their neck. But this is called as the text neck syndrome. That means when you're texting, mostly, I mean, not while you are browsing, but when you're texting, that's when you tend to move your head towards the ground, and on an average, every 15 degrees that you tilt your head towards the ground, the weight of the skull itself will increase not less than 10 kgs for every 15 degrees. So if you are like from straight to 15 degrees angle where you are texting, you're definitely exerting like 10 kilos of weight on your lumbar area on the spine. Lumbar area is nothing but the from the shoulder to the neck. All the bones on the spine are called lumbar, right? So they're called L1, L2, L3 in medical terms as well. So you're exerting 10 kilos there, and if you're tilting it further for 30 degrees, that's when it enormously increases. Now you're exerting not less than 25 kilos. It's not 10 kilos. It's 25 kilos. So likewise, it goes on. So why are we talking this? The same principle applies in virtual reality as well. I mean, when you're arranging something, arrange it so that it's straight in front of the user rather than keeping it at the bottom or at the top. Both ways, there will be text neck syndrome for the users. Okay, and text neck syndrome is so bad that it will pushes the human to get into a nausea state. So we have to be careful about it. Okay, now interactions. Now flat screens, most of them, I mean, even the mobile is a flat screen, right? I mean, it's not a sphere. It's a flat screen, right? So most of the flat screens, all you have, the type of interaction that you have is either a click or a tap. Most of them, right? Some, the smartphones that are come into existence in the last less than a decade, they have multi-finger gestures as well, like pinch, zoom, or swipe, page up, page down kind of thing, which is good. But in a 3D world, it is beyond that. The interactions will be more. Take an example of a cube, right? In a 2D world, you can zoom in, zoom out, or you can move to the left or right. But in a 3D world, you can actually tilt on any of the axes to feel or see how the cube is, right? Now the interactions have changed. So we need to understand how the humans will interact in a real world with a cube so that we can mimic the same in the virtual world as well. So those ergonomics also have to be understood. Okay. So that's about ergonomics, the human ergonomics. And the most next important thing for virtual reality that we need to consider is the metrics. Welcome to the new metrics that have been introduced because of the virtual reality. Remember the first slide about a website wherein I explained about the widths, heights, and all the rectangular or two-dimensional screen or vision, right? We have pixels or millimeters or centimeters. What are the metrics that we want to have? We can always use that, right? Because there is only a width and a height, which is absolutely fine. Now we're talking about a 3D world wherein the depth also is considered. Now, just like the computers or the monitors that we have, which has high resolution and low resolution as well. I mean, now we have like 4D, 4K and 8K monitors as well. I'm not talking about TVs, monitors itself. Wherein, I mean, the dimension, the resolution itself will change. Now we're talking about 20, 40 something in 8K, right? And the based on the color depth or the monitor, the color depth increases, and the more the color depth, the more clearer the picture would be. Similarly, in a 3D world, the depth is what is considered. Well, again, I mean, this is a new term which has been brought in, just because of virtual reality and augmented reality, wherein it is very helpful for the UX guys or the designers to design any artifacts or objects in 3D world. It's called DMM. It's the full form of DMM is distance independent millimeter. That means a millimeter square object or which can be placed at 1 meter length is what is called a distance independent millimeter. Now, if my hardware or the device that I'm using is capable of giving me a depth of 20 meters, right? And if I keep an object at 1 meter in a small resolution thing or a small hardware, the same object will increase the size and it automatically places the same object at 3 meters in high-end hardwares. Let's talk about these low-end and high-end hardwares. I mean, there are three types of virtual reality devices: the mid-range, the basic, and the high-end. The basic are nothing but the iPhones or the Samsung or OnePlus, which has the VR compatibility. So wherein, I mean, you can use a Google Cardboard and place your mobile into it and switch on the virtual reality thing. So your phone itself is the hardware that actually splits the vision into two different radii, and you can watch it as a 3D. So those are the basic hardware because it's nothing but a phone. Okay, the mid-range ones are probably, I mean, if you might have gone to any of these launch bars or any of the gaming centers, you might have experienced these VR goggles. Not all of them, but most of them, right? Those are the mid-range of VRs, like Samsung Gear VR or Oculus. There is VR2, right? So there and HTC as well. So there are a couple of devices which are at the mid-range, and again that they will enhance your mobile phone or your laptop which is connected to the device, and you can do the VR. Now the third one is a high-end devices or high hardware, wherein the simulators and the Oculus and HTC, I mean, Asus, Rogue, all these devices which has like a high-end hardware which is placed onto the VR devices and is directly connected to a desktop or a laptop. So the VR will be driven from the computer itself. They're not independent devices. So based on those devices and the hardware, the depth differs. And once the depth differs, the way that you have to design the metrics that you need to take are nothing but the DMM. In this picture, if you see this image, which is like 400 DMM by 480 DMM, if I use a basic level hardware, it will automatically place that object at 1 meter distance from the perception levels. So the user can experience that as a 400 by 480. Now the same, if the same software, if it is used in a mid-range VRs, that's when the user can see the dimension as 800 by 960, which is placed at 2 meters distance. That means the perceiving of that same object will be the same, right? I mean, if you see the Eiffel Tower from the footstep, it will be too huge. But the same object, the same Eiffel Tower, if you see from a mile away, it looks small, but because of the depth, you can easily identify or distinguish the dimensions of it. So that's called a perceiving vision. So these DMMs will actually fit very well into that perceiving vision. So that's why anything that we design in virtual or augmented reality, we have to take the DMMs as our metrics. And now gestures. Okay, what are gestures? Basically, it's the movement or a posture which actually convey some information to the other person that this is this is what I'm feeling, or for them to understand their intent. Like when somebody is saying something, you don't have to say anything. You keep you shrug your shoulders. The other person clearly understand that you are not that interested in the in the matter, right? So that's a gesture. And rolling your eyes, or keeping weird faces, all those are nothing but gestures. Now, I mean, in a VR world, obviously we cannot capture all of them, but some have to be considered. Like, say, if there is a vibration in your hand, I mean, your reaction or your body reaction for the same would be like you just jerk your hand, or you shiver your hand or wave your hand all of a sudden. That's a gesture. But the same thing, if you want to do it purposefully, then the intent itself will differ. So for us to design the UX for these virtual reality, we have to understand the gestures very well. And the gestures are there are a lot of classification, not just one. And the basis, based on the basis, the classification differs. But overall, in any of these, I mean, again, they're still exploring this area of UX within virtual reality. So there are a lot of researches happening, and there are a lot of new things which are coming into existence. But in general, there are three basic classifications. One is based on semantics, the other one is based on interaction, and the third one is spatio-temporal status. Okay, let's take the spatio-temporal status. Okay, and they're classified into two different areas. One is a static, the other one is a dynamic gestures. Static gestures are the gestures that can happen without too much of movement physically from the geographical location. Say you are standing in one place, right? You're moving your hands, just like you're playing a Fruit Ninja, right? You don't have to move from there. You can stand there, but still move your arms so that you can slice the fruits. Similarly, say you want to feel a cube, you don't have to move physically from that particular position. You can stand there and feel the cube, right? So that's a static gesture. Whereas a dynamic gesture is where the whole body is in movement, not mandatory that they have to move from that particular location, but the limbs are also acting to express something. Say, for example, you're ducking. I mean, you're playing, say what, PUBG, right? Somebody is shooting. You want to duck behind a wall, right? I mean, you'll use your limbs as well to duck down, correct? So that's a dynamic gesture. So static is where the movements of any of the elements above the torso is considered as static in general, and the whole body is considered as dynamic. Okay, let's see how it is classified in interaction. Based on interaction, it is media, direct contact, and non-direct contact. Again, media contact is where you are using a third-party device like a joystick or a glove to touch something or to interact on an object within the virtual reality. That's a media interaction, right? That's also a gesture. I mean, you're trying to touch something in a 3D world. There is another direct one, which is direct contact. That means you can see, you can do some interaction with that without even having a the joysticks. If you might have used this Samsung Gear VR, there is a laser focus which actually can make the interactions for you. So if you want to see something to your right, you move your head, the focus will come to that screen, and that screen will pop up automatically. You don't have to do any hand gestures there. That's what is called a direct interaction. Whereas there are some indirect interactions. I mean, the same example, if I am focusing on one particular billboard, the other billboards or the images will automatically move aside or move to the back, kind of interactions which are non-direct gestures. Okay, so that's the classification based on interaction, and the classification based on semantics, unintentional and intentional. Just like I said previously, intentional is where you purposefully do it, and unintentional, again, we have to understand that we are taking a human from a real world and keeping him in a virtual world wherein couple of animations or objects could shock him. When I said shock, I mean it's not a serious shock, excuse me, but a psychological shock, and that's when body reacts. And those gestures are nothing but unintentional gestures or unintentional movements. So we have to understand all these gestures for us to design a proper UX for the virtual reality. Okay. Next one is contours. Now here I want to post another say poll. Let's see how we do it. Trust me, this is the last one. Don't panic.
Raj, it's already 10:12, so we have crossed 12 minutes. Okay.
Yeah. I'll take another 10 minutes to wind it up. Hello. Can you see the poll on your screen? What's a contour? A crookedness or curves of a line, a non-conformed area on a map, a line that defines or bounds a shape, or a disarrangement in a particular form or combination. You don't have to know the answer, but because contours have multiple meanings to it. But in a UX world or in a human world, what is a contour? Okay, I'm ending the poll now. Most of them, they answered that there is a line that defines or bounds a shape, which is like 55% they answered this. And there are 27% who said the crookedness or curves of a line. Actually, the first one is the right one. A line that defines or bounds a shape, right? So if you have, if you take a contour map, the contour map is nothing but the line that, the area that they plot is nothing but the area that has the same elevation from the ground. So that's a contour map in geology, right? I mean, it's a invisible or a visible area that depicts a shape or a boundary. Now, how is that important in virtual reality? In virtual reality, I mean, if you see these three examples, right? Here you have a planks kind of thing. Here there is a curve kind of thing, and this is a flat one, right? So those are the contours. So this has a straight contour or a plane contour. This has a spherical contour or a circular contour, and this has a polygonal contour. Okay, the plane or flat contour, this is what most of the UX designers are designing as of now, wherein they want to bring the 2D screens into the 3D. Nothing wrong in it, but we have to understand what the the user wants before we even decide what type of contour that we are designing it for. Say, for example, billboards, right? Billboards can't be like a circular form. It's always flat. So if you're designing something like a billboard or a advertisement in your 3D website, having a straight contour is the best option. Whereas if you want to spread the information around the user, the circular is always the best. Okay, and the other advantages of a polygonal is where you want to have a perspective of what is happening around him, wherein you can have, I mean, it's only for the comfort zone. If you want to arrange like 3 or 4 items within the comfort zone, that's when you can go for a polygonal contour. So understanding the need and defining the contour for that particular need is also very important in virtual reality. Okay, and what are the guidelines for designing a UX for virtual reality? And it's very simple. It cannot be interactive like you have in the flat screens. It has to be reactive, right? I mean, everything the human has to feel it and interact with it. That's only the object has to respond. So it is anything that you design in VR has to be reactive than being interactive. Okay, avoid simulator sickness. This is very important because people will be too much vulnerable to this simulator sickness, because they're totally disconnected from the real world. Now they are in their virtual world, and whatever they have in the real world they may not experience it. And also, if there is something moving in the virtual world or the virtual reality that they're experiencing, whereas their body is in static position, that difference. And the gyroscope is the human gyroscope. I mean, right, the fluid in the ear, under the eardrum. That's what is a gyroscope for humans. And that's not moving. So the human is not moving, but whereas the objects and the environment is moving, which might lead to simulator sickness. So we have to be very careful in designing the animations and the interactions and the placement of the objects in virtual reality, because we have to avoid the simulator sickness. The most important thing, don't try to reinvent the UX patterns. I'm not sure, I mean, how many of you guys are aware of UX, but there is a term called mental model, which the UXers use a lot. The mental model is nothing but how a human performs, instinctively for any of the object or any of the interaction is called a mental model. There will be mental model for each and every area, geographically, cultural, as well as individual perseverance as well. So you have to understand the mental model and design around that, which will be more intuitive for the user. Similarly, in this 3D world, we have to understand that mental model and design around it rather than reinventing the wheel or trying to bring new paradigms or new UX patterns into it, wherein already they are detached from the real world. And on top of it, if you are, experimenting with all this, there is every chance that they might not like it. So anything that we are doing, I mean, user experience, from a user experience perspective, it has to be liked by the end users, right? Otherwise, there is no point in doing UX. So don't try to reinvent the UX patterns unless it's really important or it is a trend setting. Okay, build sound skillfully. Now this is very important. And again, this is the difference between a 2D world and a 3D world. In 3D world, you have to, I mean, if you have to get the attention of the user, which is happening in a no view zone, you have to use the sound is the only medium that can make the user alert that, I mean, there is something happening behind you, so you have to turn back. And again, I mean, these shouldn't be like heavy sounds, but very minimal sounds. And this is where the 7.1 or 11.2, I mean, there are like 7, 9.2, 11.5, 11.2, all these channels will help us a lot in a virtual world. I mean, gone are the stereo days. Dolby and Dolby Atmos and all those sound qualities will help us very well to design the sound in a 3D environment. So building that sound very skillfully within the virtual reality is very important. Restricts motions to interactions. Don't make the user to interact too much. Okay, make them interact only if it is needed. And design for the physical space. Again, I mean, you need to understand what the end user's physical space could be and design accordingly. Okay, those are the guidelines for any of the UXers who wants to work on a virtual reality. Okay, now this is one interesting thing. When we are talking about all this, you might be thinking, oh, I mean, this is like a new technology, new things that we are talking. What are the tools? I mean, there could be new tools that we have to use. No, the tools are very primitive. I would say, yeah, paper and a pencil. That's the best way to do it, because way back in 98, 99, when we are talking about storyboards, everybody is like, I mean, we're not doing any movie, so we don't need any storyboard. But I mean, it took a while for us to explain to everyone that storyboards are not only for animated movies or movies, but it's also for the websites. I mean, Jakob Nielsen, he himself has said that storyboards will help UX for a website, not even web application. There were no web applications at that point of time. So there are only websites, right? Even today in a virtual world, the same storyboards will help us, the UXers, to design what is needed for the VR. Okay, the next tool that most of the UX guys are familiar with are the Sketch, Adobe XD, Photoshop, Figma. I'm not sure whether they support the VR or not, but these tools definitely yes. I mean, if you remember the third slide wherein I added the third dimension, that is done in Photoshop. I haven't used any other tool other than Photoshop. So Photoshop now supports the virtual reality and augmented reality designs within Photoshop itself. There is a menu called 3D wherein you can play around with it. Okay, and the best thing that you can have is if you have an experience in any of the 3D software, 3ds Max, Autodesk, or Maya, Cinema 4D, that actually will help you understand the camera angles and the lighting and everything. That's an added advantage. I mean, it's not a compulsion, but I mean, you'll understand the 3D environment very well if you are familiar with these softwares. And the frameworks, both for testing and playing around and seeing what the user is experiencing, right? These are the frameworks that you can rely on. Mozilla A-Frame is VR for web. Daydream VR is, as I said previously, there are 3 types of hardwares, right? for any of the medium hardware, this is the framework that you can use, Daydream VR. And for high end, always it is Unity or Unreal SDKs, wherein you can test. You can also do your user research, usability research, and user research on these frameworks. Okay, so we have discussed about all these VR and UX for VR and all that stuff. I mean, the $1,000,000 question is, how is that helpful, right? I mean, without any helpful, we can't design everything for fun, correct? I mean, of course, there are gamers, I mean, who design it for games, but trust me, the virtual reality is going places. I'll show you a couple of slides, which actually will run to the areas that they are already implementing. Medical field. I mean, if you see to the right, there is a person, I mean, who is actually trying to see the anatomy of a knee. And previously, we need to have they call it as a samples or sample bodies, wherein they have to dissect and see what the how the anatomy is. With virtual reality, the training or teaching of for these medical professionals is more easy and less expensive. It's inexpensive compared to any other method. And to the left, if you see, you might be familiar with CT scans and MRIs, right? So they were if you take an MRI, it's nothing but a slice that the X-ray could do for a body part at a particular depth. Now, the VR actually is enabling the doctors or the medical professionals to go through or traverse through the whole segment of the X-ray that has been taken from it. Okay, I mean, they'll take one VR X-ray, and the medical professional will wear the VR goggles, and he can actually move his stylus or the joystick so that he can go all the way from left to right or top to bottom anyways that he wants. So those are the existing implementations. These are not experimentation stages. They're already implementing these in the medical field. Okay, this, I'm not sure how many of you know about it, but I mean, the virtual reality, we worked in 97, 98. Yes, there is a software by name VRware, wherein you can do a virtual tour for any of the buildings. That's the only capability at that point of time. But now it's also used in construction field, and the implementations have improved a lot, wherein, I mean, you can actually measure the dimensions, you can feel how you want to have the items and the furniture that you want to place within the house and everything. So this is also happening. I mean, this is not new. This is already happening. Now, I mean, if you see to the extreme left, this is a virtual reality training that is happening in a Starbucks in US. Rather than wasting the milk, the products, and the experience of the customers who are walking in, they are using these Vives, HTC Vives, to practice the coffee shop guys how to make the dishes. Once they are good, then that's when they're going to keep them on the desk. So that's also happening. Walmart, how to arrange the items within on the racks, and how to experience the customers, and how to traverse through the sections and everything. They are training with virtual reality, and I have seen these sessions happen in US. And this is the first area that they started training is the defense. If you remember the Operation Desert Storm, the whole Air Force in US, they were made to practice in virtual reality for more than a month. And when the war happened, there was not a single casualty from the flight status, and they were just they went and cleaned everything and came back. That's because the pilots were trained in the whole contour of that particular. So I mean, this is again how they created that character with the image, and they used a same age kid to capture the moments and everything, and completely created in a virtual reality. So that's about it, guys. Any questions? Any doubts? It's open for questions. I mean, anybody has a question, they can raise their hand, or type in the chat, or question and answers.
Rajshekhar, we have 2 questions in the Q&A box.
Let me go there. 1 second. I'm opening it. Is there a way to detect failure of any hardware, such as sound, colors, and how it will affect overall experience? Is there a way to self-heal in softwares in such situations or cases? The answer is no. This is where we have to do the usability testing for these scenarios. Okay, I mean, once it is designed, the UX is designed, this is where we have to, go into the simulations. Remember the frameworks that I have mentioned. Those frameworks we have to see the end results, test with the actual users. I mean, there is no self-heal or anything from the software standpoint as of now. How human psychology is impacted with excessive use of VR systems? A lot, actually a lot. So remember, if you remember the slide where I was talking about this, sickness, the motion sickness, or the virtual reality sickness, that's because of the psychological effect, right? And the psychological effect is because the mind was not able to consume and act accordingly, because the body is in static state, and in virtual world the things are moving. So initially that sickness will be there. I mean, you might have seen some videos or scenarios where people tend to fall on the floor because they were experiencing something. When those things are always happening. So there is always a psychological effect, and there are always positive and negative. I mean, if you see the last slide wherein the mother experiencing her child in a VR world, that's a positive side psychological effect. I mean, she was out of that agony in a week's time, because the kid asked, I mean, in virtual world, but I mean, the kid asked the mom that, I mean, are you going to remember me, but not hurt yourself? And she says yes. I mean, she promised the kid in virtual world, but she implemented that in the real world. Those are the positive side psychological effects. And again, the negative psychological effects, again, the fatigue on your eyes, stress on your mind, those are the things. And that's where we have, as UX designers, we have to be very careful. What is the role of motion sensors in VR in present and future, in artificial intelligence, or in daily use gadgets? Maybe you're not experiencing it, but most of the devices that we use, especially the smartphones, we're already using the motion sensor day in and day out. The gyroscopes that are there on the phones, and the motion sensors also present on the phones, the smartphones. Yeah, we're already using it. I mean, there is we don't have to wait for the future for AI to do it. And even the artificial intelligence, for the matter of fact, every phone and every camera that we are using is based on the artificial intelligence. So if you see the specifications of any of these phones, they say, I mean, AI operated cameras, right? So night vision is also AI related one. So we are already using it. Only thing is, we might have not paid attention to it. In IT sector, in terms of programming and AI based softwares, I didn't get that question. Are you talking about the motion sensors in IT field? Is that the question, Murli? Okay. Can you be more specific on it? I mean, what do you mean by motion sensors in programming, in terms of programming? What are we talking there?
Maybe you can enable him to speak, and then
I'm just trying to find his name. Murli, I mean, I have given the permission to speak. So can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Hello.
Yeah, Murli.
Yeah. My question was very simple actually. Now that the companies like Intel, Dell, or any aeronautical development sectors, like a few companies in automotive, like
Right.
BMW or whatever the sector you take it.
Right.
Few companies have already adapted in motion sensors in terms of their hardware peripherals or in the software in terms.
Correct.
So my question was, using in VR, in this present scenario, what is the best use of these? I mean, VR where we can explore or create a more
Hello.
significant programs or devices or.
Who can't hear you, Murli?
I can hear him.
Somehow I lost you.
Hello.
I think the question was, what is the best use of VR in case of automotive and things like that, right?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. See, the companies like Intel, Dell, BMW, or if you call any aeronautical companies or automotive industries or in software industries, they use motion sensors in terms of AI or MI or whatever this thing is there. So my question was, they are having it in their hardware peripherals. I mean, in a hardware section,
Correct.
they create some motion sensors using this thing. So
Correct.
what is the best way that we can combine both MS and VR to give a good supportive software components or programming or whatever we call it in the future generation, where it can be more sustainability and more realistic view, or a more appropriate or a more creative way of seeing the world in VR?
Okay, more creative way of seeing the VR in real world, right?
I tell you, in your webinar, you have specified that there is a cube in the human life where we'll see in 4 dimensions. When you Rubik's square, when it is mixed with all the colors, if you see in 4 different
Rubik's cube. Okay.
4 different colors, right?
Correct.
So in the same way, what is a more
6?
advanced?
Yeah, 6 actually. Yeah. 6
Is it audible? Hello?
Yeah, yeah. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. So
okay.
This was my question actually.
So I still feel the question was not that clear, and let me try to answer your question. I mean, I'm trying to rephrase your question again. So you're asking, I mean, what is the best way that we can use these hardware peripherals for motion sensors and gyroscopes, so that we can get, in a programming world, so that we can give the best experience, correct?
Hardware and software both.
Yeah, both in the software, so that the output is much
more
easier.
Creativity and the more realistic.
Okay. So any of these, remember the frameworks that I mentioned?
Yeah.
Other than the Mozilla A framework, which is a web-based one, and it runs on a browser. So that means, I mean, you can use it on a basic hardware. Other than that, any other software that you take, especially Unity or Bryce. I mean, Bryce also has VR in it, or VRware. Any of these softwares that you use will have the ability to interact with the these sensors. One is motion sensors. The other one is what is it? The altitude sensors, right? Pressure sensors, gyroscope. So you can actually program based on the hardware that you have. Now I'll give you an example of the best example of where we are using the sensors and where we are not using the sensors. If you see the virtual reality of Volvo, the recent one, okay, they launched a new car, and they are giving these VR goggles so that they can experience how it is going to look from the interior, and they can also drive the car using the VR, sitting on a seat. Now, in that, you don't have the motion sensors, whereas the same experience, if you are familiar with Sparsh Communications, which is owned by HAL way long back, that's a flight simulator. So there is a cube which has high-end hardware and sensors, which the software will interact to those sensors, and it will give you the actual feel of how the flight simulator is. Like while taking off, the pressure will come down, and the G forces can be implemented within the capsule. You know the G forces, right?
Yes.
The G forces can be implemented there, and the shock, the vibrations, everything can be mimicked using these sensors. Now, how far can we use? It all depends upon what the outcome that you're looking for and what is the solution that you want to bring. Does that answer your question?
Okay. And how big we can see in terms of these two is my
Yeah, as I mentioned, Sparsh Communications, they started in 98, I believe. HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics. They started this, simulated flight simulators in 98. Now, I mean, most of the pilots have been trained there. And if you're from Hyderabad or from Mumbai, you can go to any of these Mahindra and Mahindra showrooms, and you can actually also feel the virtual reality driving experience for those recent cars.
Okay. That was my question actually. So I.
So the implementations are endless. I'm sorry, Murli.
Yeah, implementation.
So right now, the most of the best utilization is happening in the, as I said, in the defense combat and medical. Those are the two areas that they're very rigorously using it.
Yeah, those have to be expanded in all the sectors like automotive.
Yeah.
Then what do you call?
Yeah, I mean, even for the supply chain, right? I mean, I gave you an example of Walmart, wherein, I mean, this is a retail store, and every retail in US, they have a R&D section where they will experiment with, how the aisles have to be placed, and what would be the the user's perception or seeing those objects in those aisles. So they'll practice for more than a month before they get into the racks. So all those are happening rather than investing on a huge store and experimenting with this keeping and removing it. Now they implemented into the virtual reality, wherein the space is very confined, and you don't have to order for these fake products. Actually, I'm not sure about if you're aware of it. Even the Revlon or the big companies, they'll give these fake packaging that they're going to release in the next 2-3 months. Those are the prototypes, and they'll keep them, arrange them in the aisles and see how the visitors are experiencing it.
Okay.
So all those things are happening in VR right now.
Right, Raj, we have just a little more time for just one last question, which is from Anantaram.
Yeah,
and this
there
will be
could
the
be
last
risks
question
with
of the
VR.
day.
Google has cancelled their VR project. Your thoughts, please. Google has not, withdrew from VR. So there is one of the projects which they started, and they stopped it because there were more, negative impact on the users, like the motion sickness kind of thing. So that's why they discontinued it. But their experimentation on the VR is still happening. If you see the Google goggles, which is based on augmented reality, and the Google Box, which is based on virtual reality, they are the ones who wants to revolutionize this VR thing. So they never stopped their support towards VR. I mean, you might have already experienced this for Bahubali, the beginning, when they launched it. Google goggles, the Google cardboard boxes, they have been distributed for free so that they can experience the Bahubali game in those boards. I'm not sure whether you remember it or not. I mean, but they distributed it for free in collaboration with the Varahi Productions. So I mean, they're still supporting, and they're still investing and experimenting in VR. Only thing is, and when one of the projects they had a couple of remarks or feedback, so they stopped that project abruptly.
Right. So
All right. Yeah.
that was about it from us today. Thank you, Raj, and thank you, Alok, and thank you everyone for joining us. Also, just wanted to let you guys know that we are having an interesting lineup of webinars coming up next month, which includes ones on Flutter, open source, JavaScript frameworks, and UX design. I will be sending invites to all of you. So thank you once again. Until then, we'll see you again. Thanks all.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Raj.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.